Hi everyone, welcome to Learning Impact. In today's lecture, we will discuss what is social mobility. We will look into the types and we can also call it forms of social mobility. Then we will discuss causes or factors of social mobility and the hindrances or obstacles to social mobility. And also we will discuss some of the examples of the social mobility in the context of Pakistani society. So let's start. Okay, first is that what is the definition of social mobility? What do we mean by this term social mobility? The definition has been given by different sociologists in different way. In our lecture, we will discuss the definition which was given by Horton and Hunt. First, we must know that who is Horton and Hunt. Horton and Hunt is famous for his book that is titled as Sociology, which is considered one of the most recommended book of sociology at the undergraduate level. And he has given a definition of social mobility which states that social mobility may be defined as the act of moving from one social class to another. Means that it is the act of moving, it is the act through which we change our social class from one to another. But if you look at this Horton and Hunt definition, it is not as more inclusive. This definition primarily focuses on a social class, means that when a person he moved from one social class to another, for example, he moved from the middle class to the upper class, this is the social mobility according to the definition given by Horton and Hunt. In order to understand this definition, we must know that what does it mean by social class. Social class is a way to categorize people into groups based on their socioeconomic status. When we consider an individual based on their socioeconomic status and we consider their position in respect to that, it will be called as a social class. So according to Horton and Hunt, social mobility is movement from one social class to another, like it might be upward or maybe downward. Like for example, if a person who is from upper class but he then moved down to the middle or the lower class because he faces losses in his business, this is also the social mobility. But remember that this definition is not as more inclusive because there are also some societies, like in case of the Indian society, where the caste system is more prominent. So social mobility exists in the Indian society is from the context of the caste. So we can say that the Horton and Hunt definition, although it discusses social mobility in one way, but it doesn't give more inclusive definition of it. Now we will discuss the other definition which is more inclusive, which was given by Fairchild. According to this definition, first we have to look into the Fairchild. We have to look into the brief biography of Fairchild. He was an American sociologist and he was also very vocal about the controversial issues like race relation, abortion, contraception, immigration. These were, one of the most debatable issues which have been discussed in American society, and Fairchild was more vocal to give opinion over such controversial issues in that society. And he has also give the definition of social mobility, which is that social mobility is a movement from one condition to another. Now, when we look into this definition, Fairchild refers that there is a movement, but it is from one condition to another. He hasn't classified it. What does it mean by condition? Because condition is something contextual. It depends on the context of a society. Like as we discussed, that Indian society has a caste system which is more prominent. In Pakistan society is a class system which is more prominent. So people are moving within a social stratification. In case of the Indian society, it is a caste-based social stratification. But in case of the Pakistani society, it is the class-based social stratification. Similarly, there are some societies where the social stratification is based on the races. Like in case of the South African society, where there is there was once before 1999, it was a apartheid state where there was a segregation of white and black people. So the social stratification which was more prominent in that society was based on the races. So social mobility in a context of South African society could be defined as the movement within a social stratification which is based on the races. So we can see that social mobility is a movement, but it is a movement from one condition to another. So when we say that condition, instead to call it a social class as the Horton and Hunt say, so it give more inclusive definition, means that if we move from one condition to another, either regarding the caste or regarding the race, depend on the context of society, that what kind of social stratification is deeply rooted in that society, it will be called as a social mobility. So in case of the Fairchild, he say a movement from one condition to another. Now condition can be anything, but in case of the Horton and Hunt definition, it is clearly defined that it is the movement from one socioeconomic status, or we can say from one social class to another social class. So this was the definition of social mobility. Now we have discussed two definitions of social mobility, and let's conclude this definition. So at the end we can say that social mobility is We can say that social mobility is a movement of an individual or a group of people from one condition to another. It is something that have been concluded, means that is a movement from one condition to another. People move from one state to another state, and is adoption of a change which may be a social progress, means that in order to have a social mobility you must be enough capable to absorb the changes in your surrounding. It is not that you have to adhere or stick to the traditional roles or to a traditional standard of living. There must be a change in a society, there must be a change in life of an individual, there must be alteration, otherwise social mobility is not possible. And the third that we have concluded is that social mobility is a rejection of our previous social conditions and adjusting into a new changes of life, means that when we have enough potential to reject the previous social condition and to try, and we have enough capability to adjust to a new changes of living, then it is the only way that we can have the social mobility. Otherwise social mobility is not possible. If you are stick to the traditional ways, or you are stick to the traditional norms, or you have become too much used to your social condition that you don't want to change it, then in that way social mobility will never be a possibility. So we can say that from the definition we have concluded that social mobility is a movement of individual from one condition to another, and it is a something that there must have alteration either in the society, either in the life of an individual, and it is the rejection of the previous social condition and adjusting into a new changes of life. This is something we have concluded from the definition of the social mobility. Then there are some types of the social mobility which we have to discuss. I have drawn this, this chart of these types of the social mobility, which has illustrated all the types in single table. Social mobility has the types including the horizontal mobility, vertical mobility, intergenerational mobility, territorial mobility, intra-generational mobility. And within vertical mobility, we have upward mobility and downward mobility. Now, we will discuss each and every type of the social mobility in detail along with the examples, okay? First, we will discuss territorial social mobility. Now, if you give attention to this term territorial, which is more referring to a territory, means that it is a social movement. It is a movement of individual or a group of people from one condition to another, but that condition would be in a context of territory. It would be in a context of residence. So it means that the change of residence from one place to another is called a territorial social mobility. When people, they move from one place to another, and we have usually witnessed such kind of territorial social mobility whenever we have a rural-urban division in our society. Whenever there is a technological advancement, people move from rural areas to urban areas in search of the better standard of living, in search of the better opportunities of occupation. This is something obvious, and we usually witness it in our society. So territorial social mobility is one of the common type of the social mobility which mostly society pass through. And another example of the territorial social mobility could be, in case of the internal wars and conflicts. Whenever there is a war or conflict or unpeaceful situation in a country, people, they migrate from one to another. And also some kind of historical events. For example, in case of the independence of Pakistan, when United India was divided, millions of Muslims, they migrated to Pakistan. It was also a territorial social mobility movement from one condition to another, but that was in a context of territory or residence. So we can say that territorial social mobility isn't always about the conflict or wars, but it is also a kind of social mobility that usually happen in our society under the normal circumstances, like in case of the urbanization, modernization, people move from rural to urban areas. So example of the territorial social mobility could be, for example, in Karachi, 70 to 80,000 people, they enter the city annually. There is the highest migration which is faced by the Karachi, and that's why the Karachi demographics is getting changed. There are now more non-Urdu speakers in Karachi. So we can say that this highest migration is also one of the example of the territorial social mobility. 70 to 80,000 people, they are entering into Karachi annually. And if we look into the data, in 1959, the migrants constituted about 82% of the total population of Karachi. And within the last last 30 years, the population growth rate in Karachi has been 7% annually. Okay, these are the figures which have been taken from the 10th Annual Conference 1977 of Sociological Association Journal on Urbanization in Pakistan. Okay, so the Karachi is facing the one of the highest migration in Pakistan. That there are more people getting into the Karachi, and that's why Karachi. We can take this as an example of the territorial social mobility. Now, the second example could be the 4% population move from rural to urban areas. In case of the Pakistani society, it is because, as we have discussed, that there is more urbanization, technological advancement, industrial revolution. It is rural to urban migration is not something limited to the Pakistani context, but it is a global phenomenon. That there is now more migration towards the urban areas, and there is now globalization and the urbanization everywhere. So territorial social mobility. The example of territorial social mobility could also be taken, as we discussed, that the United India was divided and millions of Muslims, they migrated to Pakistan in search of a better life and secure life. So this was the territorial social mobility. Now, the second example is the second type which we will discuss is the intra-generational social mobility. Now, intra-generational is, if you give attention to this term, intra-generational. Intra means within a single generation, it means. So social mobility is the movement from one condition to another, but if this social mobility is within a single generation, means that, for example, a person who was engage in a low paying job, but then he also work hard along with it, and then he move up in a social stratum by getting the high paid job. This is the intra-generational, because he hasn't waited for his multiple generations to change the social stratum. He himself work hard and he changed his social stratum. So this is the intra-generational, when individual bring change in his life but within a single generation. There are some kind of the social mobility which is not possible in case of the intra-generation. For example, mostly such kind of social stratification that are deeply rooted in a society or aspired by the societal norms. For example, in case of the caste system, intergenerational social mobility in case of the caste is not as easily possible as in case of the class, because caste system is a more closed system. So mostly the people, whatever they do, they will carry the same status which a society has assigned to them over multiple generations. So intergenerational social mobility is a social mobility that take place relatively over a short period of time, and that happen within a single generation. Okay, so it takes place over a relatively shorter period of time within a same generation. Now, the example of the intra-generational could be a lecturer becomes a professor at university after doctorate degree. It is the good intra-generational mobility. If there was a lecturer who becomes a professor who got a high scale because he was also studying a doctorate degree and he finished that's why he got promotion. This is the intra-generation. He himself changed it. He hasn't waited for his multiple generation to pass his position in society. No, he himself worked hard and he moved up in a social stratum. This is how intra-generational social mobility could be illustrated by this example. But remember that within the intra-generational social mobility, we have two types. That could be the good intra-generational or bad intra-generational mobility. So if we take the similar example, if there is a professor who has been accused of something, we can take such example that a professor, he has lost his job because of any allegation or because he has committed a crime. So he lost his job and a public trust, and in that way he moved down in the social stratum. Then it will be called as the bad intra-generational mobility, because he was himself responsible for this, and over a shorter period of time he changed his social status, but that was in a downward direction. So it is in case of the bad intra-generational mobility, we can reverse this example. So this is what is intra-generational social mobility. Now, the third intergenerational mobility. If we look into this term intergenerational means that between the generations. And the previous one was intra, which means within a generation. Now inter, which means between generations. There are multiple generations who had participated to change the social stratum of their family or of their group. So this is what we call the intergenerational social mobility. So this term was introduced by Cohen, and he has written his book which was named as the Introduction to Sociology, in which he for the first time introduced this concept. And it refers to social mobility that take place between the generations, okay, not within. You have to say between generations, means it took multiple generations to pass it, to change the social stratum. Now, in case of the plumber's son become the leader of their community. If the plumber, who was a father, his son become the leader of their community, this is the intergenerational mobility. But if the plumber, who was a father, he himself changed his social status by doing hard work or by becoming leader of the community, then in that case it would be called as the intra-generational. But he himself hasn't changed it. It is his son who has changed his status, then it will be called as the intergeneration, because it is not something that has been changed within a single generation, but because the generation has been changed, and now it is the second generation who has changed the social status of their family by becoming leader of their community. So this is the intergenerational social mobility. Okay, then in case of the intergeneration, we have also the bad and good intergenerational mobility. Like in case of the good, as we discussed, that a plumber's son become the leader of their community, it is the intergenerational. But in case of the bad intergenerational mobility, for example, if there is a businessman who has a lot of property, who has plenty of wealth, but his son, he wasn't proved as such a responsible son, and he caused losses to his business, and as a result, what happened that he lost all his property and wealth which has been accumulated by his father, then it will be called as the intergenerational social mobility, but it would be in a bad sense, means the bad intergenerational social mobility. Okay, so this is the third social mobility type which we have just discussed. Now we will move to the vertical social mobility. Vertical social mobility it refers to upward or downward change in the absolute or the relative rank of an individual or group. Whenever there is a change in a social mobility, but that may be upward or downward, means that within a social stratification, there is either the arrow which is moving up or the arrow which is moving down. It will be called vertical social mobility. Okay, so in that case, the example could be, for example, the job promotion, or there's a progress in education, to be called as the upward social mobility, as it will provide them more opportunity to get the lucrative jobs and to have more high income. But on the other hand, if there is a loss of wealth or property, then it will be called as the downward social mobility. But in both cases, it is the vertical social mobility. Okay, because the social stratum has been changed from one to another, and these both social stratum, they are not equal in status or in position or in power or the prestige. That's why it is called vertical. For example, if we consider two social strata, and these two social stratum, they are equal in prestige and respect and regarding the material position or reward, then in that case it wouldn't be called a vertical social mobility, even if a person change it from one to another. But in case of the vertical, there must be that a person move from a stratum to another which is different from his previous one. Okay, so it might be downward or it may be upward. Then the fifth is the horizontal social mobility. When a person, he changed his social stratum, but his initial and the final social stratum have equal importance in a society, it will be called as the horizontal social mobility. So in case of that, it can be defined as the interaction of profession with no significant moment in a social status, means that there is no significant change that had been taken place in the social status regarding its prestige that had been attached to it, the respect level or even the salary level hasn't been changed. In such case, the social mobility will be called as the horizontal social mobility. Okay, so example of this horizontal social mobility, for example, transfer from one government department to another in a same pay scale. For example, in case of the transfer from one government department to another in the same pay scale, it will be called as a horizontal, because there is no significant change in social status. So for example, a person who is a civil servant or who has the 19 or 18 scale, and he has changed his department, it doesn't matter. For example, once he was involved in the administrative service and now he has moved to the foreign service, it's fine, because if both scales are same, then in that case it will be called as the social mobility, as it is a movement from one condition to another. But it wouldn't be called as the vertical, it will be horizontal social mobility, where his initial and the final social stratum has equal prestige, respect, and money benefits. So that's why we can say that such kind of social mobility where there is no significant change in a social status, just because that it might be because of the reason that he wasn't satisfied with his previous condition. That's why he changed his department, but it doesn't change his scale. That's why it doesn't bring a significant change in his social status, and it will be called as a horizontal social. Another example could be change in profession with no income change. For example, there is a person who is a professor at one university. He left that university and joined another one on the same scale. Then in that case, it will be called as a horizontal social mobility. All that is a movement from one to another, from one condition to another, but it hasn't involved any kind of progress, any kind of loss. That's why we are saying that it is a horizontal social mobility, as they have just changed their condition, not a scale. It hasn't been progress, but at the same time, it hasn't shown any loss. So that's why it can never be upward or downward. Now we have to discuss the causes of social mobility. In case of the causes of social mobility, there are various factors. Like, for example, first are the positive factors. If you consider the social mobility, there are positive factors including the education, meritocracy, globalization, which has always been resulted in the upward social mobility. In that case, these are called as this positive factor. If you have more access to education, of course, will lead to the more opportunity of occupation, which can lead to the upward movement in a society. Similarly, if there are decisions taking place in a society based on a merit, so of course it will provide more opportunity to the deserving people to have more lucrative jobs. And on the other hand, if there is for example, globalization, so in that case there is now more opportunity available in case of the urban society, as there is more technological advancement, so there is diverse fields available and now people can go for that. So the positive factors include the upward social mobility. But on the other hand, there are also some kind of negative factors, and these negative factors can also be stated in the obstacles of social mobility, okay, which we will discuss after this. So in case of the negative factors, there are also post-social mobility possible, but this kind of social mobility will always be downward. For example, in case of the poverty, if there is a kind of absolute poverty in a society where the people, they can't even find their basic necessities in order to fulfill their basic needs. So what can we expect from them regarding the occupation or regarding the luxuries of life? Of course, they have to, if they are unable to cope with the basic necessities, of course their choices or opportunities in a society will be too much limited. But on the other hand, there is a discrimination. For example, in society, if the decisions are not based on the merit and there is a discrimination either on the basis of religion, on the basis of gender, on the basis of race, so of course it can also lead to the uneven opportunities availability to different classes of the society. On the other hand, if there are some kind of the racist or discriminatory policies that have been enforced by the government, it can also lead to the downward social mobility of individuals. We can take various examples. For example, in case of the US society, there are the government policies that inversely affect the black people. Similarly, in case of the India, when there was the controversial Citizenship Act, which was introduced in order to exclude the Muslims from the social circle. So we can say that the negative factors is there are such government policies that can influence an individual reach to the particular social stratum. Then the structure factors. Structure factors include the capitalism. For example, that how the capitalism either it push it or it overcome the chances of social mobility in a society, institutional changes and demographic changes also. For example, in case of the baby boom, when there was in 1960 there was a baby boom when there was a high birth rate. So of course, if the society it is more populated, depend that either the youth population is high, so it will of course affect the opportunities available to each and every person. Like in case of the Indian society is the world considered one of the world's populated country. So in that case, there are now more youth population who are all competing in a competitive market. So of course, they have less chances that each and every individual will have the equal opportunity to access the resources. So the demographic changes can also affect the social mobility. Then the individual factors, such factors that are associated or embedded within an individual. For example, the talent, that how much he is capable to have a deserving seat, or a motivation or social skills, like what either he's aspire or what level of motivation he has in order to reach to a particular goal, and also the social skills, that what kind of skills he has and what kind of skills are valued by the society also, that either it's aligned to them or not. For example, in some societies the communication skills or the IT skills are considered more important, as these skills are now demanded globally. So individual factors can also lead to the social mobility. Then the inhibitors of social mobility. In case of the inhibitors, we discuss some of the obstacles that can limit our social mobility, and we have discussed the negative factors in cases of the causes of social mobility. So we can write down the negative factors in the inhibitors of social mobility. Okay, so there are the individual factors. For example, if individual he has a low self-esteem or he has inadequate preparation, so of course it will overcome his chances of social mobility. Similarly, there are some cultural factors like a stigma attached or a language barrier. For example, most of the prisoners, when they get out of the prison by fulfilling all the requirements, and when they pass through the punishment which court has set for them, even if they pass through the whole process and they spend the time which God has assigned to them in a prison, but still our society, they attach stigma to them. They do not give them a second opportunity to become a full citizen and to become more responsible citizen of our society. We always attach stigma that he was the ex-convict. So in that case, it can lead to the demotivation of such people in our society. So they will not get embedded equally in our society. It can lead to the overcome of that can act as a barrier of social mobility in their life. So there is always a stigma attached to such people that can limit their moment in a social stratum. And similarly, the language barriers, that the people who are unable to interact with the other because they don't have enough knowledge of the language. So of course, if there is a language barrier, it can also lead to the limited opportunities of social mobility in a society. Then the structural obstacles include all the disparities, inequalities, bias policies, political corruption. If there is corruption, nepotism, there is no meritocracy, there is no respect for merit, no respect for laws. Of course, in such society, those who have a talent, their talent will just get wasted, because in that society it will never be able to provide equal opportunity for each and every individual to realize their potential. So it can also act as an inhibitor of social mobility. Then we will discuss the social mobility in a Pakistani society. If you look at the social mobility in a Pakistani society, remember there are various initiatives which have been taken by the Pakistani government at various occasions, and which has led to the social mobility up to some extent in this society. For example, if we take the Prime Minister's Youth Program, this was a program which was initiated by the Pakistani government in order to provide a small loans to the young entrepreneurs, and also to provide a laptop to motivate those who are deserving students in their department, who are the toppers of their own department. It was primarily aimed to motivate the youth in order to take part in entrepreneurship, and also to motivate them to achieve the higher goals. So this is the Prime Minister Youth Program, which was the one of the initiative which was taken by the Pakistani government for motivating people to have the moment in a social stratification. Then the second is the National Vocation Training Program, which is aimed to provide the short courses related to the IT field, so that they will able to realize their potential and able to compete in a globalized world, as these IT skills are more demanding. And the third is the Benazir Income Support Program. It's one of the initiatives which has been taken by the government and still persist, and it aimed to provide financial assistance, especially to the women and especially to those who are from the low socioeconomic background. So they were trying to include more and more women in order to have access to these small financial assistance, so that they will be able to realize they will be able to fulfill their basic needs and will set the goal which is far higher, and they can move up in a society. Then National Health Program. National Health Program is an initiative taken by the Pakistani government in order to, which was aimed to have equal access of healthcare facilities to each and every individual of the society. So that's why such kind of initiative which we can discuss that these were the steps which was taken towards the social mobility in a Pakistani society. Although that there are various initiatives which have been taken, but still there is a lot which we have to do in order to uplift our youth population and to motivate them to have the higher social mobility in a society. Then we will look into the social mobility indicators of the Pakistani society. Remember, if someone asks you about the indicators, or someone asks you that how can you assess the social mobility of any society, you have to go for the indicators. And indicators of the social mobility include literacy rate, unemployment rate, HDI, which is the Human Development Index, also that the per capita income. These all are the the reports which published by the United Nations, reports which get published annually. So these all are the indicators of the social mobility. In case of the Pakistani society, these indicators, these are showing worse condition of Pakistani society, because the literacy rate is about 62.3%. It's according to 2024, and that's why Pakistan ranked 137 globally. It is one of the worst ranking. And secondly, unemployment rate, which is about 6.34%, and which is according to 2021, and Pakistan ranked 105th globally. It is one of the worst ranking also. In case of the issue with the tragedy of Pakistan is that half of the population is based on youth, but still the youth which could prove as an asset for our society has become a burden, because there is a huge unemployment. And the third is the HDI, is the Human Development Index rate, is about 0.540, which was this data has been taken. This data is latest. It has been taken from the report of 2023, and according to HDI, Pakistan ranked 161 out of 191 countries. It was also one of the worst indicator. So these indicators show that the initiatives which has taken by the Pakistani government isn't enough. It isn't sufficient. We have to do a lot, because although there are some initiatives which have been taken, but these initiative hasn't been practically implemented as it was designed. And also that there is a lot we have to do, and most of the initiative which was taken, especially in case of the underdeveloped or developing countries, they are mostly accused of corruption. There are always the a theft in budget. There is always accusations of nepotism. So such initiatives can never be fruitful as we can expect of. So such initiatives can never be fruitful in our society. So that's why we can say that these are the social mobility indicators of the Pakistani society. Okay, so this was all about the social mobility definition, types, causes, obstacles, and some example and indicators from the context of Pakistani society. So this was the end of our lecture. Thank you so much for watching, and leave your questions in a comment section below, and like, share, and subscribe our channel for latest lectures. Thank you.